YouTube, it's Eric from the Reptile Room again. Today I figured we'd look at some ball python morphs and talk about their genetics a little bit, and we're going to do that by looking at some of the snakes that we've actually got available for sale right now. So we're going to start with some basic stuff, and then we're going to work on to compounding genetics a little bit. I don't know if we'll talk a little bit about recessive morphs too, which can be a whole fun thing of their own. So let's start things off pretty basic. Oh, this little monkey's going to try to give me a bite. I'm just going to grab something to dissuade him from doing that. Nothing to stop snake bites like coconut hand and body lotion. So I just give him a little boop on the head, pick him on up. So this right here is a very common morph in the hobby. This was one of the first morphs ever discovered. I believe this was Kevin McCurley, and at the time this was called Jungle Pastel. Now there's a lot of different lines of this mutation now. It's just called Pastel for the most part. And you'll see this in pretty much any place that has ball pythons for sale. Even if you walk into a big box pet store and they have ball pythons and then fancy ball pythons.
Now, flourish the pinky. Flourish the pinky.
This is often what those fancy ball pythons are. Fancy ball python is just a term for we don't know anything about genetics, so it doesn't look normal and we're going to call it fancy. But there are genetic factors at play. You can have line-bred traits, which are just, say you breed two dark animals together in hopes of getting darker offspring. That will be a line-bred trait. We call that polygenics. This is an actual mutation. Now, mutation is a scary word and often misunderstood. Mutations can be very beneficial to an animal. This is how animals adapt and change to their environment over populations, over generations. Mutations in the wild can also sometimes be deleterious. This means that they're not beneficial to the organism's survival. A mutation of a pastel in a wild ball python probably wouldn't hold them back that much because they're very similar to the wild type ball python. They'd still blend in all right. But this is a very great, if you're looking for a morph snake on kind of a budget, pastels can be a fantastic way to go. Now, this morph is an incomplete dominant mutation. Basically what that means is this is the heterozygous form of pastel, which just means there's one copy of that mutation present in the animal. If I were to have two copies of that mutation present, this would be called a super pastel, which is just a homozygous or a complete pastel. And that's even brighter. They have a sort of a paled out spot on the top of their head. Looks like male pattern baldness. This is just your classic pastel ball python. This is a fantastic starter morph for many people. So we're going to move on now. And let's see what we're going to check out next. I think, yes, this is a great segue. So this right here is called a cinnamon ball python. And this is I love this morph. It looks like a normal, but a bit more formal, like a ball python in a tux. Now, this is part of what we call the 8-ball complex. In morphs, you have allelic traits, usually in incomplete dominant morphs. If I were to take this and breed it to another cinnamon to make a super cinnamon or a homozygous complete cinnamon, it would basically be an all-black ball python. There are some things you want to watch out for with this. Sometimes in the super forms of the 8-ball complex, you can have deleterious secondary mutations pop along. We call it like shark jaw or duck billing, where there's slight deformations of the mouth. Usually these animals do a-okay, but there are many ways to make a black ball python that can be a little more work than a super cinnamon. You can get the same effect and kind of avoid those health issues, which is sometimes it's just going to be a better way to go. So we've taken a look at two single incomplete dominant morph animals now. We've taken a look at pastel, which is sort of a brightening and pattern mutation, and we've taken a look at cinnamon. This is a darkening and also a pattern mutation to some extent. Now, the lovely thing with morphs and ball pythons is you can stack them. And in incomplete dominant traits, they're going to complete for dominance in what we call the phenotype, or the visual appearance of the animal. So if we take that pastel phenotype and we take that cinnamon phenotype, we can combo that together, and we can get this. You can see traits of both shining through. The lightening of the pastel causing this light blushing here, as well as the very sort of linear and formal alien heads, what we call these down the sides. those lateral patterns there, and that's from the cinnamon. Now, pewters are really fantastic. I'm a big fan of them. Very simple combo to make. But you're just basically stacking morphs together so that these two are completing for dominance. You see expression of both. Now you can stack on this even more. For example, you could have a pewter like this, but it would have the homozygous or complete form of pastel. We would call that a platinum. I'll see if I can edit a picture in on the video here, because they're quite stunning. Now this is also heterozygous for genetic stripe. You can't see that on the animal at all. It's not visible in what we call, of course, the phenotype, the visual appearance, but it is in the animal's genotype, which is its genetic makeup. Basically what that means is that genetic stripe is a recessive trait. In the heterozygous form, you're not going to see it on the phenotype of the animal. Now, if I were to breed this to something else that was a heterozygous genetic stripe or a homozygous visual genetic stripe, you would then see it on the animal. That would become a visual feature of that animal's phenotype. So really cool stacking combinations. You can do this a whole lot. You can stack all sorts of combinations. If you stack too many, everything's going to wash out and start to look a little bit browned out and ugly, and you're going to have a really hard time telling what you've hatched out, honestly. So we're going to pop that back now, and we're going to move on to something else. So we've seen the pastel, and this has pastel in it, but it also has something else present that we haven't looked at yet. This is another very old in the hobby morph. This is called pinstripe, and I believe this was discovered by Brian Barczyk. Now, when you pop these together, you have the pinstripe, which is very obviously the pinstriping pattern on the animal, and that pastel is really popping the yellows and making things a bit more pale. Now, if we look right here on the animal, we see this little washed out area. This is not something that we bred for. We call this a paradox. These are just like birthmarks. They pop up on animals sometimes in their phenotype, and there's a whole bunch of genetic factors at play. You can't really replicate it in a breeding project. It's just kind of a neat little feature, an anomaly within the animal's appearance. So yeah, this is a very neat combination, a little bit more muted in the colors, but really big variation off of the pattern that we've looked at so far. Now, morphs can affect both pattern and color as we've seen so far, and there are quite a few pattern effective morphs. This right here is two things we haven't seen at all yet. The pattern effective morph on this is called enchy, and that's what's sort of stringing things together, removing the holes out of these alien heads, and giving it not quite a pinstripey look, but a bit more connectivity. This also has a trait called lesser in it, and lesser's a really neat morph that brightens up the animal. Now, when we talked about cinnamon, we talked about how if you have the homozygous or complete or super form of cinnamon, you have basically an all-black snake. Lesser does the same thing. If you have the super form or homozygous form of lesser, you're going to have a pure white ball python with icy blue eyes. We call this a blue-eyed leucistic. So yeah, really cool morph to work with. You can do all sorts of neat things with lesser. You can even mix lesser and cinnamon together, and you kind of have this combating situation going on. Again, they're competing for dominance in the animal's phenotype, so you can have some really cool effects come out of that. So I'm going to pop this little baby back in there, and we'll move things up a little bit. So we've looked at pastel. You may have noticed a theme here. There's a lot of pastel. When it's one of the first ones found in the hobby and it's in complete dominant, it works its way through everything, which isn't the end of the world. Pastel's a fantastic morph. It does a lot of cool things. Now, another morph that has become it's not as old.
What you want.
But it's become really big in the last few years is banana. And banana kind of looks like an albino ball python, but it's not stripping away all the melanin, which is the dark pigment of an animal. And it's also incomplete dominance, so you don't need to have it present in both parents in order to produce it. But you can still see the eyes are dark with a bit of a red hue to them, but there's still melanin there. And there's these dark freckles on the animal. More and more of these will grow in with age, kind of like an aging banana. Now, this is a really cool trait in the sense that it is a sex-linked trait. So this is a male banana, and it is a male maker. If this was to be bred, you could get some banana babies. There is a very, 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 like 98% chance that all your babies that are bananas are going to be boys. This mutation can switch between the sex chromosomes from time to time, and you can pop out a female. And we actually have one of those that we've held back so that we can breed the elusive female banana ball python to one of the males and get a super banana, which will be super neat, I think. So yeah, the pastel lightens it up, and the banana, well, it makes it look like a banana. So really cool trait. Now, if we take this pastel and we take this banana and we stack one more thing on top of that. No, that's the wrong snake. Hold on. We've seen pinstripe, and this is the accumulation of all of those traits. Now, you've noticed there's a lot less spots on this. This is with banana, the more traits that you stack on, the less you see that spotting. But you can really see the beauty that the pinstripe adds to this, and then the pastel pales out the head to make it almost white on top. It's just a really stunning animal, and relatively easy to breed for. Pinstripe is a dominant trait. So pinstripe is a dominant trait, and basically this means that if you were to have the heterozygous single copy or homozygous double copy form of that mutation, they would look the same. It is a dominant trait through and through. A lot of your offspring will inherit this trait from the parents, yeah, there's no super form of pinstripe. It's all the same basically, whether it's heterozygous or homozygous. So at this point, we have 3 traits stacked on top of each other, 2 incomplete dominant and a dominant trait. Pretty nifty stuff. So we're gonna pop that back. So we have one more snake to look at today. And this is when we're gonna talk about recessive traits a little more. We've talked about that with genetic stripe. And this is a really cool, really popular recessive trait. This actually has 2 mutations on it. One of them is called yellow belly, very minor trait. A yellow belly ball python kind of looks like a normal until you pair it with certain things. So the recessive trait present in this is piebaldism, and this is something you see in a lot of animals across the animal kingdom, from foxes to birds to everything in between. Now, piebaldism is very evidently these big missing pieces of pattern on the animal. The yellow belly is what's making all these oranges really pop on this critter here. Now, both parents need to have yellow belly to produce pied to produce a pied offspring. So whether you have a visual or homozygous pied ball python and you breed that to another homozygous, all your babies will be pied. Or you breed it to a heterozygous, which won't look pied at all, you can produce some pied babies. You can even breed a heterozygous pied to another heterozygous pied. Again, they'll look like normals, and you can produce pieds out of that. Now, they don't always have these white patches. This is the most common expression of it. You have high whites and low white pies. I would say this is a mid-white to high white. A lot of pattern missing on this. Sometimes there's just tiny little pieces of white patches on them. That's less common. That would be a low white. Or you can have no white pieds at all. Really beautiful animals. There's no downsides to pied as a pet. As you can imagine, in the wild, this would be what we would consider a deleterious mutation. So basically, if you hatch out in your little ball python and you stick out like a sore thumb in the grasslands, predators are going to have a much easier time finding you, and prey is going to have a much easier time evading you. We call this in an environment a selective pressure. Basically what that means is this individual has less of a chance of, in the wild, this is in captivity, he'll do just fine. But in the wild, this guy would have less of a chance of catching meals, of evading predators, of growing up to mature size, and then breeding and reproducing with females, and thus passing this recessive mutation down the line. Now, you can find these in the wild because these ball pythons have tended to move underground a lot more. They're already kind of a burrowing species that live in rodent dens and stay protected. So you will find them, but you won't find very many of them. Because of course they're going to get picked off, and those that get picked off won't breed, and then that won't proliferate in that population. And this is how they'll adapt as a species. That's how ball pythons got their initial pattern in the first place. The ones with the pattern best suited to their environment lived the longest, reproduced the most, and passed down those genes. But yeah, this is a recessive, so both parents need to have it to produce it, and this is very popular in the hobby, with good reason. These are gorgeous, gorgeous animals. Anyways, that's all we're going to look at for ball python morphs today.